Welcome to our deep dive today. You've sent us these excerpts from a U.S. Senate hearing on abortion, and it took place after that Roe v. Wade decision was overturned.
Yeah.
And we're going to try to kind of navigate all the different arguments that are presented.
Right.
Legal, medical, even philosophical points of view.
It is really fascinating how all of those things intertwine.
Yeah.
You can't separate the legal from the medical, from the ethical.
Absolutely.
When you're discussing this topic.
And we're going to unpack it all
Yes.
for you so that you can understand it.
Yes.
It's easy to get lost in the headlines.
Right.
But we're going to try to untangle some of these threads.
Yes, we will. And we're approaching this material with neutrality.
Right.
We're really focusing just on the arguments within the text that you provided,
That's right.
not offering our own opinions or anything like that.
Yeah, we're just going to try to help you make sense of it all.
Exactly.
And one of the things that jumps out right away is this clash over language. Senator Kennedy questions Ms. Lourdes Rivera on her use of the term birthing people instead of mothers.
Right.
And he kind of suggests that this is like an attempt to erase the word mother.
Yeah, he seems to be implying that.
Yeah.
And her clarification is that she's trying to be inclusive
Yes.
of transgender and non-binary individuals who can become pregnant.
It's interesting, though, because does that then create a different problem where you're alienating people who strongly identify as mothers?
That's a really good question.
Like the senator seems to be suggesting.
It highlights how difficult language can be,
Yeah,
especially around these sensitive topics.
right.
You want to make sure that you're using inclusive language, but then you also have to be mindful of, the feelings that certain words carry.
The weight that words carry.
The weight, exactly.
Yeah, and this tension around, how we talk about pregnancy and abortion continues.
Right.
Senator Kennedy asks Ms. Rivera if she supports abortion the day before birth. And she pushes back on that and says that's not how abortion care works.
And it's interesting to think about the language that both of them are using there.
Yeah.
He's using very stark language,
Right.
The day before birth.
Yeah.
She uses labor and delivery to really kind of emphasize that, late-term abortions are generally only performed in very specific situations.
Right.
Typically when the mother's life is in danger,
Right.
or the fetus has very severe abnormalities.
So it's the same procedure being talked about in two very different ways.
Actually.
And that probably has some bearing on how people perceive it.
The day before birth brings up a very different image
Right.
than labor and delivery.
Right.
And it really taps in to those fears and misconceptions that already exist.
And it's fascinating to see this battle over language.
It is.
But, at its core, this debate really boils down to when does life begin?
Right.
What value do we place on an unborn child?
And that's where the philosophical heart of the matter lies.
Yeah.
We see that playing out in the exchange between Professor Bridges and Senator Kennedy. The senator is emphasizing the value of the unborn child.
Right.
And Professor Bridges brings up systemic racism
Right.
and its impact on abortion rates among Black people.
And then some of the senators express concern that abortion rights advocates place zero value on the unborn child.
Yeah.
But then we also see Mrs. Harrell, who states very clearly that life is a human right.
Yes.
So how do we reconcile those seemingly opposite viewpoints?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
It goes right to the heart of the ethical dilemma around abortion. How do you balance the rights and autonomy of the pregnant person
Right.
with the potential rights of the unborn?
Where do you draw the line?
Exactly.
Is it at conception?
Right.
At viability?
When is it?
At birth?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer.
Yeah.
It's a complex question.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how Ms. Madkeki brings up this example of AB 2223 in California,
Yeah.
which she argues would allow babies born alive during a chemical abortion to be left to die.
Wow.
So that adds another whole layer to this already very complicated discussion.
So even if we could all agree on the inherent value of life,
Right.
there are still these gray areas and these difficult scenarios
Exactly.
that make it really difficult to know how to create legislation.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder about the accuracy of the information that's
Yeah.
being presented in some cases.
Right.
We'd have to really examine AB 2223 to see if Ms. Mackey's interpretation is correct or not.
It's a reminder that we can't just take anyone's word as gospel.
Exactly.
Especially on topics like this.
Yes, especially sensitive topics like this.
So much to unpack, but this is great. I think this sets us up perfectly for the rest of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
So,
picking up where we left off,
right.
You can really see how this hearing went beyond legal and medical definitions. It really became about fundamental values and beliefs.
And you see these like contrasting worldviews. And to be honest, I'm sitting here like, how can we even begin to find common ground when there's such a divide on just like the value of life itself?
That is the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I don't think it's impossible.
Okay.
I think one path forward might be to focus on shared values.
Okay.
And if you look at Ms. Hurl's statement that life is a human right, she's coming from an anti-abortion perspective.
Right.
But that statement itself could resonate with people on both sides of this debate.
Yeah, regardless of your stance on abortion, I think most people would agree that human life has inherent value.
Exactly.
So then the question becomes, how do we protect and uphold that value in a way that respects individual autonomy and addresses the complex realities that people face?
And that's where the real struggle is.
Right.
It's not just about the unborn child. It's also about the pregnant person.
Right.
And their right to make decisions about their own body and future.
It's about navigating those competing rights and interests. And it seems like it's like we're being pulled in opposite directions constantly.
Yes.
On the one hand, we want to protect what many view as vulnerable life.
Right.
On the other hand, we want to empower individuals to make choices about their own lives.
Exactly. And you see that tension reflected in the language that's used throughout the hearing.
Yeah.
You hear terms like murder, infanticide on the one side, and then you hear bodily autonomy, reproductive rights on the other side.
It feels like they're speaking different languages.
It does, doesn't it?
And these terms are intended to evoke strong emotions.
They are.
And when you're dealing with that, it makes it even harder to have a level-headed discussion.
Absolutely.
So how do we move past these barriers?
Right.
How do we start talking to each other instead of past each other?
I think one really important step is to acknowledge the validity of people's lived experiences. We heard from medical professionals like Ms. Rivera, who talked about the realities of abortion care and the tough decisions that patients have to make.
And we heard from Professor Bridges, who highlighted those systemic factors that are contributing to higher abortion rates.
In certain communities.
And these are voices that need to be heard and respected,
They do.
even if you don't necessarily agree with their conclusions.
Right.
I think understanding those experiences is essential for finding solutions that work for everyone.
I agree with that.
So it's not about dismissing someone's experience because it doesn't align with your personal beliefs.
No, it's about listening with empathy and trying to see the world from their perspective.
It's challenging.
It is.
But it's a vital step.
Yeah.
It really makes you think. So we've talked about shared values. We've talked about acknowledging lived experiences. What else?
What concrete actions can we take to bridge the divide?
Yeah.
I think it's also about ensuring that we're working with accurate information.
Okay.
Especially when we're talking about really sensitive topics like abortion.
Can you give us an example?
Well, think about Ms. Mackey's claim about AB 2223 in California.
Okay.
She suggests that it allows babies born alive after a failed abortion to be left to die.
Yeah. That's a serious accusation.
It is.
But is it accurate?
That's what we need to determine.
Right.
We can't just accept claims like that at face value.
Right.
We have to look at the actual text of the law.
Right.
Consult legal experts, fact check everything.
So it's like becoming an investigator.
It is.
In a sense.
It is.
We have to do our own research and not rely on sensationalized headlines or potentially biased interpretations.
Yeah. Be very careful about where you're getting your information from.
Yeah. And this applies to both sides of the debate.
Absolutely.
Both sides. We need to be just as critical of information that reinforces our existing biases as we are of information that challenges them.
Absolutely. 100%.
It's so easy to fall into that trap of confirmation bias.
It is.
But we have to resist that if we want to have meaningful conversations about these complicated issues.
I agree.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
Shared values, lived experiences, accurate information.
Keep those in mind.
It feels like we're building a foundation for a more productive dialogue.
We're definitely moving in the right direction.
But this is just the starting point.
This is just a starting point.
We have a lot more to unpack.
We do.
And a lot more listening and learning to do along the way.
Yes. Always keep learning.
I appreciate you helping us navigate this complex landscape.
You're very welcome.
It's been really eye-opening.
Yeah.
Before we move on,
Yeah.
is there anything else from your notes on the hearing transcript that we should touch on?
Let me see. Yes, there's an exchange that I think really encapsulates the heart of this debate. The back and forth between Professor Bridges and Senator Kennedy.
Oh, yeah.
He repeatedly asks her if she believes there should be more Black babies aborted. And she emphasizes her goal of creating conditions where people can live with dignity and make their own choices.
Yeah, that was...
It got pretty tense.
It was pretty tense.
It did.
And it was interesting to see that disconnect between their perspectives.
It was.
You know, the senators focusing on the unborn child as an individual.
Right.
And Professor Bridges is focusing on the broader societal context.
Yes, and that makes it almost impossible to find common ground.
Right, because it's like they're talking on two different levels.
Exactly.
Even though they're using the same words.
Exactly.
It's frustrating, but it's also an important insight.
It is.
If we're going to have these conversations about abortion productively, we need to bridge that gap
We do.
between individual rights and societal well-being.
That is the core challenge.
Right.
And there are no easy answers.
Right.
But by recognizing that disconnect, we can at least start asking the right questions.
Like, how do we build a society where every child is wanted and has the chance to thrive?
Exactly.
And how do we balance that with respecting the rights and autonomy of individuals?
Those are the questions we need to be grappling with.
Wow, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive.
Yeah.
It's shown me how much complexity this issue holds and how crucial it is to approach these discussions with nuance and empathy.
I'm glad to hear that.
I think it's time for a short break, just to
Okay.
kind of absorb all this information.
These are weighty topics.
Yeah.
They are.
We'll be back soon with part 3 of our deep dive,
Okay.
where we'll continue exploring these intricacies and hopefully find some of those points of connection and understanding.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome back to our deep dive. I'm still processing everything.
Yeah.
There are so many layers to this.
There are. It is a lot to absorb, but I think we're starting to see
Wow.
some key themes emerging from this whole debate.
Like that tension between individual rights and societal well-being that you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. And it's a tension that we grapple with in many areas.
Yeah.
Not just abortion. Think about freedom of speech versus hate speech,
Uh-huh.
or individual liberty versus public safety.
It's true. Those are also complex issues with no easy answers, but it feels like that tension is even more pronounced when we talk about abortion because it touches on such deeply held beliefs about life and morality and the role of government.
I think you're absolutely right. And then when you add on top of that, the lack of consensus on when life begins becomes even more difficult to navigate those competing rights and interests.
It makes me think about the importance of language, too.
Yes.
The way we frame this issue really shapes public perception. It does, and influences policy decisions.
And you see that in the hearing excerpts you provided with both sides, using language very deliberately to kind of evoke certain emotions and strengthen their arguments.
It's a reminder that we need to be so aware of the language being used in these discussions.
We do.
To ask ourselves what assumptions are being made, what values are being prioritized.
It's not just about listening to what's being said, but understanding how it's being said and the impact that that can have.
It really highlights the power of language.
It does.
I mean, it can be used to inform, to persuade, even to manipulate.
Absolutely.
And in a debate as emotionally charged as this one, that power is just magnified.
It is. And that's why these deep dives are so important. Because they allow us to take a step back and dissect the language and understand the arguments being made on a deeper level.
If we want to have productive conversations about abortion, we have to move beyond the slogans and the sound bites.
We do.
And really engage with the complexities.
And that requires a willingness to listen to different perspectives. Even those that we might find challenging or even offensive.
It's so easy to just stay in our echo chambers.
It is.
Surrounded by people who already agree with us.
Right.
But that doesn't help us find common ground.
It doesn't. And it's so important to step outside of those comfort zones. And really engage with people who hold different beliefs.
And maybe in that understanding, we can find pathways to solutions that work for a greater number of people.
That's the hope.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I just want to emphasize that the abortion debate is not simple,
No, it's not.
It's a complex web of legal, medical, ethical, social issues.
Totally.
And there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
There isn't.
We have to recognize that each person's circumstances are unique.
Yes.
And that we should respect their right to make the best decision for their situation.
Absolutely. While acknowledging that those decisions have consequences both for the individual and for society as a whole.
It's finding that balance that's so challenging.
It is. The key, I think, lies in open and honest dialogue, informed by accurate information and really guided by empathy and respect.
And a willingness to look at our own assumptions and biases.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
None of us have all the answers.
No.
But by engaging in these difficult conversations, we can learn from each other.
Yeah.
And hopefully move towards a future where every individual feels valued and empowered.
That's a powerful thought. I think that's a good place to wrap up this episode. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes. Thank you for listening.
Into the language and limits of abortion rights. We hope this deep dive has given you some new insights.
Yeah.
And encouraged you to continue exploring this complex issue.
It is complex.
Remember to keep questioning.
Yes.
Keep learning and keep engaging in these thoughtful dialogues with those who hold different views. Until next time.